Everything they've built, every secret they've kept, and every heartbeat they've shared now hangs by a thread. In Blood of My Blood episode 10, Henry and Julia's love story takes its most dangerous turn yet. The walls are closing in, enemies are closer than ever, and time itself might be their only escape. But when love and fate collide, who survives and who gets left behind? The night was colder than usual, but the air carried something else. Tension so sharp it could slice through the silence. Henry stood near the dim glow of a dying lantern, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded the train tickets. 1714. The numbers almost mocked him now. He didn't believe in fate, not really, but there was something haunting about the way those numbers appeared, stamped into their escape like a prophecy. Julia's name echoed in his mind, and he could already picture her standing in the shadows, clutching William close to her chest, ready to risk everything for one impossible dream. Freedom. And another part of the town. Julia moved like a ghost through the narrow corridors of Castle Leathers. The plan was simple, at least on paper. She and Henry would meet by the stone bridge before dawn, board the train, and vanish into a future that wasn't theirs. But simple plans often bleed the hardest. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and every whisper of sound made her heart jump. William stirred in her arms, whispering, "Mama?" Julia pressed a trembling finger to her lips. "Sure, my love. Just a little longer." What she didn't know was that danger had already found them. The brothel worker, the one with the jealous eyes and the voice like poison, had overheard every word. Her heart once belonged to Henry, or at least she thought it did, and betrayal always comes dressed as heartbreak. She had whispered everything to Simon Fraser's men, and by now, riders were already on their way to the bridge. Henry waited, checking his pocket watch again and again, the ticking sound growing louder in his ears. "She should be here by now," he muttered, pacing the dirt path. Every second felt like an hour. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. He thought of Julia's soft laugh, the way she looked at him like he was her only truth in a world full of lies. He couldn't lose that. Not now. Not ever. Suddenly, from beyond the trees, came the sound of hurried footsteps. Henry spun around, ready to draw his pistol, but instead, Julia emerged, breathless, hair unpinned, her cloak fluttering like wings behind her. "Henry," she gasped. "They know. We have to go. Now." He didn't ask how or why. He just grabbed her hand and ran. Behind them, a faint echo of hooves broke through the fog. Simon Fraser's men were faster than they expected. They sprinted through the fields, the wet grass clutching at their boots, William crying softly against Julia's shoulder. "We'll make it," Henry promised, though his voice betrayed the fear clawing inside him. He looked back only once, enough to see torches flickering in the distance. They were being hunted, and the hunters were closing in. As they reached the edge of the forest, a strange hum began to fill the air. It was faint at first, almost like the sound of wind through glass, but it grew louder with every step toward the ancient stones. Julia froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Henry nodded, his eyes fixed ahead. The circle of stones stood like silent sentinels, bathed in pale moonlight. Legends spoke of travelers who vanished there, of voices that called across centuries. Henry never believed in magic until now. "Henry," Julia said, her voice breaking. "If this works, if we go through, we might never come back." Henry reached for her hand. "Then we go together." But fate, as always, had other plans. A gunshot ripped through the night. The echo shattered the air. Julia screamed as Henry stumbled forward, clutching his side. He fell to his knees, his breath sharp and shallow. "No," she cried, pulling him close. Blood bloomed against his shirt, dark and warm. The riders had arrived, Simon Fraser's men, led by the cold-eyed Bollock, their torches burning like fire against the mist. "Take her," Bollock shouted. "And the child." Julia's mind raced. Her eyes darted toward the stones, now glowing faintly with a light she didn't understand. She could feel them pulling her, calling her name like a whisper across time. Henry looked up at her, his face pale, his hand trembling as he gripped hers. "Go," he rasped. "You have to go." "I'm not leaving you," she cried, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You are," he whispered. "For William. For us." The men drew closer, shouting, the thunder of their horses shaking the ground. Julia turned toward the stones, her heart breaking apart. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know where it would take them. But she knew one thing. She couldn't let them die here. Holding William tight, she ran toward the circle as the air cracked with another gunshot. And then, just as she touched the stone, everything went silent. The world spun around her in a swirl of light and sound. The cries, the fire, the pain, all fading into something vast and cold and unknown. And as she vanished into time itself, the only thing left behind was the echo of Henry's voice, whispering her name. The light faded slowly, and when Julia opened her eyes, the world around her had changed. The air was cold and heavy, filled with the kind of silence that seemed to stretch forever. She stumbled forward, clutching William tightly against her chest as the last glow of the stones disappeared behind her. Her knees hit the wet ground, and for a long moment, she stayed there, trembling and breathless. The ground beneath her felt real. The sharp chill of the wind was real, but nothing else made sense. She turned her head, her eyes scanning the dark forest, hoping to see Henry emerge from the mist. Her voice broke as she called his name, but only the wind answered her. There was no movement, no sound, only the whisper of the leaves in the stillness. That was when the truth hit her. Henry hadn't come through. Julia fell to the ground, her body shaking with grief. The memory of that last moment burned in her mind. The flash of the gun, the cry that tore through the night, the warmth of Henry's blood on her hands. The stones had taken her, but left him behind. She pressed her face into the dirt, her heart heavy with the unbearable thought that she might never see him again. Her tears soaked the earth until a small voice pulled her back. William whimpered in her arms, his small hand clutching at her cloak. That sound, weak but alive, brought her back to herself. She could not give up now. She wiped her tears and whispered that everything would be all right, though even she did not believe it. Standing up on trembling legs, she looked around the endless forest, unsure of where to go. The silence was eerie, as if time itself was holding its breath. The trees were ancient and towering, their branches weaving shadows that danced under the pale light of dawn. Julia started walking, each step heavy with exhaustion. Hours passed, though she could not tell how many. The forest seemed endless until at last she saw smoke in the distance. A small stone cottage stood alone on a hill, the faint orange glow of a fire flickering inside. Her heart surged with hope. She quickened her pace, though her legs screamed with pain. When she reached the door, she knocked weakly, her hands numb and shaking. The door opened with a creak, and an old woman appeared, wrapped in a rough shawl, her eyes sharp but gentle. Without hesitation, the woman ushered her inside. The warmth of the fire wrapped around Julia like a blanket. The cottage was simple, but alive with the smell of herbs and wood smoke. She held William close as he drifted into uneasy sleep beside the fire. The old woman handed her a cup of water and studied her face quietly. There was something knowing in the way she looked at Julia, as if she understood something unsaid. Julia tried to speak, but her voice was cracked from crying and exhaustion. The woman told her that she was called Moira and asked where Julia had come from. Julia could not answer. She only whispered that she was lost, that she didn't know where she was. Moira nodded slowly, as though she already knew. Her voice softened when she said that Julia must have come through the stones. Julia froze at the words. The old woman's expression grew darker, filled with something between pity and fear. She said that her grandmother once told stories of people who vanished through the stones, travelers who did not belong to the time they arrived in. Julia's heart raced. She asked how she could go back, how she could return to where she came from. But Moira only looked away. She said that those who pass through rarely return, that the stones take what they want and give nothing back. The words cut deep. Julia turned away from the fire, tears filling her eyes again. She could not accept that she would never see Henry. The memory of his voice, his touch, his promise echoed in her mind. She whispered to herself that she would find a way, no matter what it took. Moira placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and told her that fate had strange ways, that love sometimes found paths through time itself. Julia sat in silence, staring into the flames as thunder rumbled outside. She did not believe in fate, but she believed in Henry. Miles away, in another time, Henry lay bleeding on the cold ground near the stones. The night around him was still, the fire from the riders' torches long gone. He had survived, but just barely. Pain coursed through his side, every breath a struggle. The stones were silent now, their glow gone, but he could still feel the energy that had pulled Julia away. He dragged himself forward, leaving a trail of blood on the moss. The world swayed before his eyes as he reached out toward the circle. He whispered her name into the darkness, begging the stones to take him too. But the air remained still, and nothing happened. Hours passed before help came. Murta arrived, his cloak soaked from the rain, his face grim as he saw Henry lying there. He knelt beside him, his voice rough with anger and sorrow. He told Henry that he should have run, that no woman was worth dying for. But Henry could barely speak, his words breaking as he said that Julia was gone through the stones. Murtagh's eyes followed the circle of rocks, his jaw tightening. He had heard stories of people who vanished there, old tales whispered by those who believed in the impossible. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Henry looked up at him and swore that he would find her, no matter where or when she was. Murtagh gripped his shoulder tightly and told him to stay alive first. The storm raged around them, lightning flashing across the sky, and the stones seemed to hum faintly once more, as if they were listening. The night swallowed their voices, and though time now separated Henry and Julia, something unseen began to stir within the stones. The bond between them had not broken, it had only begun to twist through the threads of time, waiting for the moment when love would once again defy destiny. The storm that night was unrelenting, its fury echoing across the highlands as if the sky itself mourned what had been torn apart. Henry lay in a small cottage miles from the stones, his wound wrapped and his body weak. Murtagh had carried him there after the rain had ceased, refusing to let him die on that cursed hill. The firelight flickered across Henry's pale face as he stared into the flames, his thoughts trapped between memory and pain. Every image of Julia haunted him, her trembling voice, her tearful eyes, the way her hand slipped from his as the world swallowed her whole. He knew she was gone, but not in the way death takes someone. She was somewhere else, someone else, and that thought both tormented and kept him alive. Days passed. Henry's body began to heal, but his mind grew restless. The stones called to him in his dreams, whispering in voices he could not understand. Each night, he heard Julia's cry, faint and distant, as though carried on the wind from another world. Murtagh tried to talk sense into him, warning that chasing shadows would only bring death, but Henry was no longer listening. He had seen the light, felt the pulse of the stones, and something inside him told him it was not over. He could not explain it, but love had become his compass, and it pointed only one way, back to her. Meanwhile, in another century, Julia woke to the sound of rain tapping against the window of Moira's cottage. The old woman had been kind, giving her shelter and food, but Julia's heart was never still. She spent her days standing near the edge of the woods, staring at the horizon, half hoping she might wake up from the dream. She tried to adjust, learning to light fires, fetch water, and live without the noise of the world she had lost. But every night, when William was asleep, she would walk outside to where the hills curved like waves beneath the moonlight. There, she would press her hands to the cold earth and whisper Henry's name, believing that somehow, through the fabric of time, he might still hear her. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons began to change. The ache of grief slowly shifted into a steady determination. Julia started searching for answers, traveling to nearby villages, asking quiet questions about the stones. Most people dismissed her, calling her a dreamer or worse, a witch. Yet one night, in a dim tavern on the edge of the glen, She met a man who claimed to know more. He was old, his voice hoarse, and eyes filled with secrets. He told her that the stones opened only when two souls bound by love stood at the same moment of loss, that time itself bowed to the strength of what was meant to be. Julia's heart beat faster. She did not understand how, but she knew then that Henry was alive. She could feel it. Back in Henry's time, the rumors of the stones began to spread among those who believed in the old tales. Henry, now stronger but still marked by pain, returned to the circle under the cover of night. The air around it was charged, the same strange hum vibrating through the ground. He knelt before the largest stone, his fingers tracing its rough surface. He thought of Julia, of her courage, her laughter, the promises they made beneath the stars. He whispered that he was coming for her, even if it meant losing everything. As his hand rested on the stone, a faint light shimmered beneath his palm, weak, flickering, but alive. The same moment, miles and centuries away, Julia stood in the same position on the other side of time, her hand pressed against the cold surface of the same stone. The air around her began to stir, the wind rising into a spiral that lifted the leaves and sent a strange warmth through her veins. The child in her arms stirred, sensing something beyond sight. The light beneath her hand grew brighter, and for the first time since she had arrived in this strange past, she felt hope. Then it happened. The stones pulsed with energy, their glow spreading across the ground like fire. Time itself seemed to tremble. Julia's hair whipped around her face as she struggled to hold on, the sound of the storm growing louder, merging with a deep hum that shook her bones. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face, whispering Henry's name over and over until her voice broke. But I am the other world. Henry felt the same pull. The ground beneath him shook, the wind howling through the glen. He cried out, pressing harder against the stone, shouting Julia's name into the storm. The light burst between them, bright, violent, alive. And then, for a single heartbeat, time shattered. When the light faded, the world was silent again. The stones stood still, ancient and cold as they had always been. For a long moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement. Then, from the mist, a figure stirred. Henry lay on the grass, his hand still resting on the stone. His body trembled as he slowly opened his eyes. A soft voice broke through the stillness, calling his name. He turned, and there she was, standing a few feet away, her hair tangled, her cloak torn, but her eyes full of disbelief and tears. She was real. Julia was there. Neither of them spoke at first. The world seemed to hold its breath as they moved toward each other. When they finally met, the silence broke, not with words, but with the sound of a heartbeat that belonged to both of them. They held each other tightly, afraid that if they let go, time might change its mind. Around them, the stones hummed softly once more, their magic quieted, as though satisfied. Somewhere far away, the storm began to fade. The dawn crept slowly over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and gray. Henry and Julia stood together, knowing that fate had given them one more chance, a fragile, impossible gift. They did not know what waited ahead or how long they would have, but in that moment, they were no longer divided by time. The stones had tested them, but love had answered back, stronger than destiny itself. And as the first light of morning touched their faces, the past and future seemed to fold into one single truth. Some bonds are too powerful for time to break.